If you escaped to the north, which was allegedly safe, a slave catcher could come get you and return you. And that is not a way to live. So I did not learn that the Underground Railroad went to Canada and to Mexico until I was taking African American studies when I was an undergrad. And I wish I had learned it sooner because I've been so curious, because it's like the descendants of those people still exist, right? Like 100, 150 years ago. And I've been spending more time learning more about it, especially because I'm curious about those food traditions, right? Because clearly there's going to be some remnants of those food traditions, those southern food traditions, of those people that made it into Canada and made it into Mexico. So I went and did some digging, okay? And we're going to talk about two distinct groups here. So let's start with our cousins in Canada, right? So it's estimated, I think, upwards of 30,000 people migrated into Canada. Even Harriet Tubman herself had a residence in St. Catharines in Ontario. So it was more people started migrating out of the United States when the Fugitive Slave Act, the second Fugitive Slave Act, was passed in 1850. Because that meant that even if you escaped to the north, which was allegedly safe, a slave catcher could come get you and return you. And that is not a way to live, because that you're living under a lot of stress constantly all the time, right? So some people were like, I'm getting up out of here. They decided to go for the border. And at this point in time, Canada had largely abolished slavery, and so had Mexico. Mexico is, I think, the first in North America to abolish slavery, right? So people start migrating into Canada, and this group called the African Nova Scotians forms. And the African Nova Scotians are kind of a multitude of different groups of people. So they're mainly people who were brought to Canada by British colonists, so people who were enslaved, refugees of Black loyalists, so these were people who fought for Britain during the American Revolutionary War. Of course, Britain lost, right? So they fled. They fled to Canada. There was also groups of Jamaican Maroons at one point, but apparently a lot of them rematriated to Sierra Leone or went back to the Caribbean. And then freedom seekers from the Underground Railroad. So all these groups of people are mixing and create this like distinct African class in Canada, particularly with high populations in Nova Scotia, right? And then the African Nova Scotians, they go on to create their own traditions. Like, it wasn't like everything was all like great and hunky-dory in Canada. They still faced all kinds of political persecution. You know, they had Jim Crow style policies long after they abolished slavery, that Black Canadians were continually having to deal with. See, even long before Rosa Parks didn't want to give up her seat on the bus, Viola Desmond didn't want to give up her seat at a Nova Scotia movie theater. And then that was her legacy, and they ended up putting her on the, I think, $10 bill. I have to double check. So crazy things happened up there. And we have a lot of similar things in history. For example, in the United States, we're very used to Black American towns being burnt down or being destroyed. Same thing happened in Canada. There was all kinds of settler communities that popped up around Canada. One of the most popular ones being Africville in Nova Scotia, I think Halifax, right? Now, the people who lived in Africville were tax-paying residents of Halifax, right? But they were still not getting access to public resources like fresh, clean water. So this community was more or less sustaining itself while still paying taxes to the Canadian government, but not getting the resources they needed. And then eventually the mayor of Halifax ordered that the town be torn down and people had to be moved. And that has been a stain on Canada's reputation for decades. And I had made a video about this on my TikTok because I thought it was really interesting, because we rarely ever hear about or from Black Canadians, right? You hear a lot of Black American history, you very rarely hear about Black Canadian history. Like, slaves went to Canada, so why don't we hear from them, right? A bunch of Canadians come in my comments and they're basically just like, yeah, they don't teach it. They don't teach about us. We're here, we exist, but they don't teach about us. They teach us more Black American history than they teach us our own history. Like, Viola Desmond went on that $10 bill. A lot of people didn't even know who she was, which is a massive, massive disservice. Now I think there are museums and things around Halifax and around Nova Scotia and Ontario talking about that history, but Canada has made a very clear effort to hide their Black history, right? In terms of food traditions, I did find that like they mostly eat very similar soul food. Like they still eat cornbread, they still do collard greens. I think they have some things that are adapted to the local climate, given that it's colder up there, but it was very, very similar to Black American Southern traditions. I've been making these Nova Scotian codfish cakes that were like codfish and potato, super delicious, very similar to salmon patties or salmon croquettes if you grew up with those, right? So Black American migration into Mexico in particular was definitely a lot smaller because it was mostly people from Texas. And Texas was kind of like its own thing, right? They were a part of Mexico at one point, then they were their own state, and then not own state, own country, sort of. And then Texas, Lone Star State. Texas has always been doing its own thing for all of eternity, right? So most of the people that migrated into Mexico were from Texas, but there are some stories of people that that were coming from further states, right? But it was a harder sell. So there are stories of people getting on boats in New Orleans, in Galveston, and going to ports in Mexico like Veracruz and Matamoros and stuff like that, right? So, and then I found it also an interesting point is that there are because the border to Mexico was so close to the United States, it was kind of this dead man's land. No one was really there. Like slave owners and plantation owners wouldn't want to put their property that close to Mexico because it carried too much of a risk of people escaping. So these ranches owned by these like mixed race families started to appear around the border, helping people escape into Mexico, which I found super duper interesting, right? Another core point of that relationship is that the fact that Mexico abolished slavery so much sooner than the United States helped contribute to the tension that caused the Civil War, because basically what was happening, because Mexico was so close for all these southern states, a lot of people, enslaved people, were saying, okay, we're going to take the risk, we're going to go. Slave catchers ain't like that. Not slave catchers. Plantation owners didn't like that. So the plantation owners go to the U.S. government, right? They say, y'all need to go down there and negotiate a treaty with the Mexicans because all our people are leaving and we want our stuff back. It's impacting us economically, right? U.S. government's like, okay. They go down to Mexico. They say, hey, we want to negotiate a fugitive slave treaty, right? Mexico is basically like, don't bring that shit down here. Don't bring none of that around here. Anybody that touches Mexican soil is irrevocably free. And don't send your slave catchers down here because we will shoot them. It's illegal. Can't do that, right? So that deal failed. Now, there's one group in particular I want to focus on, which is the Mascogos Negros, right? Mascogo means Seminoles, right? So essentially, the Mascogos, they settled in this northern area of Mexico, in Coahuila, and right now it's called Nacimiento de lo Negro, which means birth of the blacks. And pretty much who they are is that we all know that Florida was owned by Spain at one point, and there was the Seminole Nation was there, right? People from the South would escape into Spanish Florida and intermarry with the Seminole Nation and live there, be free, be happy, whatever. So there were people like born in Spanish Florida that had never been enslaved, right? The United States takes control of Spanish Florida, and they take all the Seminoles and the Black Seminoles. They say, y'all got to go to Oklahoma. Put them on the Trail of Tears, right? So they go on the Trail of Tears. They end up in what turns out to be modern day Oklahoma. But the risk of slave catchers was so high, and so many Black Seminoles had never been enslaved in the first place. They're just like, yeah, we're not doing that. So they take who they can, and they make the journey down to Mexico. The people that make it, they settled in northern Mexico in Coahuila, and that's where they stay. They negotiate with the Mexican government to join the military, protect the border, stuff like that, but they were all free. And I think the coolest part of that tradition is that they celebrate Juneteenth every single year. They've been celebrating Juneteenth in northern Mexico, in this town, for more than 100 years, I think 150 years, honoring their American heritage. And their food traditions were definitely not as close to United States, and very underdocumented. It is an extremely underdocumented group of people, as well as a extremely underdocumented food tradition. There are a couple professors in the United States who are doing work on this front, but it was largely underdocumented. I did get lucky enough to find a document that had a bunch of Mascogo recipes listed by the Mexican government, but of course it's all in Spanish. Luckily, I speak Spanish. And I read through some of them and I found some very interesting threads. Like I found a potato salad, I found different kinds of cornbread, different kinds of skillet bread. The one that I settled on for this essay was this sweet potato skillet bread where you shred sweet potatoes, mix them with like some kind of fat, sugar, spices, and then you fry it flat in a pan. It was really, really nice. It was really good. And I found that very interesting. But I think it's very cool because then the next question that I asked myself is like, is this soul food? And I would say yes, because when you really look at the history and when you look at the groups and the people behind it, saying that it isn't soul food would just be incorrect. It's just diaspora soul food, right? You know, Indian food in Britain doesn't stop being Indian food. You know, Mexican food in the United States doesn't stop being Mexican food. It's just like Mexican food of the diaspora. And I would argue that the traditions of the people who are descendant of the Underground Railroad still classify as soul food. And I think that is really, really beautiful and really, really interesting. And I think we need to do a little North American family reunion. I don't know. What do y'all think? That's all I have to say about this topic. If you would like to read the full essay, it is available on my Substack. And I will see you for the next one.